Hello there folks, welcome back to the Chap's Guide. My name is Ash and I am your host on this journey through men's style, self-development and personal grooming. Now on that self-development front, I've often advocated on this channel that reading is probably the most approachable and easily accessible way to develop yourself that any person can have on a daily basis. I mean, it goes without saying that if you read just a few pages of any book, just at the end of the day, when you're about to go to sleep, you will learn something. And those little pieces of learning all add up and eventually amount to quite a broad knowledge of things. And that's the ideology I've been taking throughout my life. So, I thought I would share with you today my favourite book of all time, because you might be interested to know what impassions me when I read. And the book I'm going to talk about today is a fictional book. Now actually I generally read one non-fiction, one fiction book in succession as I go through life. That way I get learning and I get entertainment in regular intervals. But today's book is a fictional book, and it is The Remains of the Day by Kazuo Ishiguro. And it's an interesting book, but it's a book which, even after recently rereading it, really stimulates some passionate feelings and some emotion within me. And I have to tell you, that doesn't happen all that often when I read. So, a little bit about the author. Kazuo Ishiguro, or his actual formal title is Sir Kazuo Ishiguro, because he was knighted just a couple of years ago, is an author of originally Japanese descent, but he moved to the United Kingdom as a very young child, I believe, when his English skills weren't even developed. And throughout time, he has become probably, and I think it's widely acknowledged, one of the most recognised and prestige-related living authors in the world today. He hasn't got a huge body of work. He only produces one book every few years, and famously he takes a number of years before he produces books. His works are really eclectic. Some of them are set in the history of the past, like this one, set in the 1950s. His most recent book, Clara and the Sun, which I recently read, was set in the future. So a bizarre collection of topics as well, you know, medieval history, English history. It's very interesting stuff. Might be definitely worth looking up Kazuo Ishiguro. Now this book today, The Remains of the Day, I think, having read most of his works, is his masterpiece. This is the book which will outlive him in its reputation. And from the reader's point of view, it is thoroughly stimulating and enjoyable book. Kazuo has actually won the Nobel Prize for Literature, which is undoubtedly the world's most prestigious award within its field. But this book won the Booker Prize way back when it was launched. Now, the Booker Prize, for those who are unaware, at the time was the most prestigious award for any book, I believe probably in the world, but it was limited to British and Commonwealth authors. But yeah, this book won the Booker Prize, and rightly so. It is a fantastic book. So what I'm going to try and do is give you a plot summary of the book. It's not going to be spoiler free, so if you really wish to read the book and not know what happens, watch no further. However, I don't think it harms you if you understand what the book is about, because it's not actually the plot. It's not a great plot line. It's the mechanism of the writing. So, the summary is this. The book is written from the point of view of the main protagonist, and that is an oldie-worldy English butler called Stevens. Now, we never know his first name, right? And that's important. There's a lot of formality involved in this book, but he's an old-world English butler of the classic school, as you can imagine. You picture a butler in your mind, it's Stevens that you're thinking of. And the book is set in the mid-1950s, but the majority of the action is set in the 1930s, because Stevens is a butler at the end of his working life, right? He's probably quite a mature man at the time the book is set. And the book is written from his point of view, almost as if he's writing in a diary. So it's from his perspective all the way through. And in the 1950s, Stevens has worked for this fictitious grand country house called Darlington Hall for pretty much all of his working life. And The glory days of this hall have passed. The previous owner, Lord Darlington, has died. It's now owned by an American businessman. And the staff at the hall have run down to a bare minimum. And he is seeking, Stevens, as the sort of person who runs the household, is seeking to connect with an old employee, the old housekeeper of the house, called Mrs. Kenton, or Miss Kenton. And she'd worked there for a number of years, maybe a couple of decades, way back in the 1930s when they were both in their prime. And now she's moved on, got married, and lives in Cornwall. And the whole premise of the book is Stevens is on a road journey. He's driving his owner's car across country to meet Miss Kenton and to offer her re-employment back at the house. And in this journey, he encounters a number of situations. So his car breaks down and he meets people. He goes to a beauty spot and he looks upon the beauty of England. And whilst he's doing all of these things, he has reminiscences. He remembers his heyday and what are in his memory the glory days of Darlington Hall and his relationship with Miss Kenton, who was the housekeeper at the time. So he's remembering back, and that's the sort of the premise of the whole book. It's reminiscences with little instances of the current time and the progress of his journey. And the reminiscences are really what piece together the beauty of the book. Because in the 1930s, it's the days before the Second World War. And Lord Darlington, Stevens' master of the house, is seen as a gentleman, very much a gentleman who is interested in progressing, the foreign affairs of his country. I think he held some sort of minor office. He's a fictitious character, but in the book he's, said as having been a minor minister overseas. But he's using his influence to try and seek appeasement for the Nazis to prevent any possible conflict in the future. And whilst it's not made abundantly clear to us in the reminiscences, at a later point in the book, it becomes obvious that Lord Darlington is a Nazi sympathiser and his ideology is flawed. But Stevens, whether he understood that, recognised it or not, he doggedly sticks to his duties as a butler. He doesn't make any observations about whether he thinks his employer is right or wrong. He just does his job. And this is what the book is all about. It's about Stevens' almost fanatical attention to detail. His remarkable service, his attention to his service. And the one word which comes across repeatedly throughout the book is dignity. Stevens is obsessed with retaining this level of dignity which one would expect of a butler. A great butler. He aspires to be considered a great butler. And this dignity involves, never breaching the boundaries of conduct between himself and Miss Kenton. So he's the butler, and the butler traditionally is in charge of all the male staff in the country house, and the housekeeper is in charge of all the female staff. So they're all kind of equivalents of status, but their duties interact all of the time, obviously. And we get the sense that there's a little frisson of attraction between them both. It's never openly said. He never addresses her as anything other than Miss Kenton, and her never anything other than Mr. Stevens. But they increasingly grow close without it ever being implied that there's a romantic spark between them. But it becomes obvious to us as the reader. But this is repressed by Stevens because of his maniacal obsession with dignity. I mean, it goes to the extent that his father, his elderly father, who's employed in the house as an under butler, falls ill when there is an important conference taking place within the country house, which the butler is an integral part, and he's got an important role to play. His father falls ill, has a stroke, and he's dying. It's made clear to us he is breathing his last breaths upstairs in his rooms in the country house. But Stevens, refuses to comfort him, to go to him for his last earthly moments, because he felt such a compulsion to carry out his dignity, his duty, and to remain steadfast. It's something of a failing, and when you read it, it sounds not very exciting, but the way that it's written, the way that Stevens speaks, actually, you know, his dialogue is immaculate. You know, if you want to hear how an Englishman used to speak in the 1950s, you know, the example is Stevens' dialogue. It is perfect, you know, immaculate use of the English language, good descriptive words. He just delivers in a way that I couldn't dream of seeking to, you know, use descriptive words and just enunciate the things which are around me. So very, very well written from that point of view. Stevens is a character who, you know, you sympathise with, because he is so indoctrinated into this world in which he lives, where he is, as I say, you know, fanatical about making sure he gives the best service to his employer. This is what it's all about. Nothing else is important, just the delivery of service. Even when it becomes obvious to us that there is something amiss with Lord Darlington's ideology, such as when he asks Stevens to dismiss the female members of staff who are Jewish. Stevens makes no comment. He doesn't remonstrate, he doesn't intervene. He carries out his employer's instructions. Even though he might have different feelings himself, it's never expressly said. So that's really the sort of theme of the book. He's on this journey, and as he encounters little things in the modern era, and I say the modern era, in the mid-1950s, he's harking back to the mid-1930s. This period, 20 years in the past. Eventually, he gets to meet Miss Kenton in Cornwall, and he discovers that her life has been less than perfect. Her marriage was unhappy. She remains married, but she has left her husband on a number of occasions, Mr. Ben, but she had a child. So she meets him in a hotel. He'd written ahead. She meets, they have a cup of tea, and they spend an afternoon together discussing, you know, reminiscing about the past and about the life that she has lived in her marriage. So they have a cordial meeting, and it becomes obvious that Miss Kenton is not in a position to take up an offer of employment in Darlington Hall, because her daughter is about to have a child. It's about to be her first grandchild, so she's going to stick it out with her husband, and she makes that very clear. So Mr. Stevens gives Miss Kenton a lift to the bus stop, and in so doing they have a conversation while they wait together for the bus. And this is one of the pivotal moments in the book, because she says to him that she had pictured a life together with Mr. Stevens. And this is a sort of heart-wrenching moment, because this is the first time one of them has broken down that formal barrier between each other to express some emotion, some feeling. And we sense the moment has passed. The opportunity for these two people to be together in happiness was in the past. It can't happen in the future. And honestly, it is gut-wrenching. It's the simplest of things, where she expresses, you know, she says that she had thought of perhaps a life they may have had together. And he is, you know, remains steadfast, never shows any emotion. She gets on the bus, and off she goes, and they go their separate ways. And on his way back to Darlington Hall to continue his life, he stops at another seaside town, Weymouth, and he happens to be sat on a bench on the seafront speaking with an older gentleman. And he breaks down. He talks about his sadness, that his life was perhaps spent misguidedly in the service of somebody whose ideology was inappropriate, wrong. And of course, how he never followed perhaps his emotions. And it's the only time that we see Stevens show any humanity in the book. I believe he has tears, and you know, it's this breakdown of his life. And the stranger says to him, you know, look, pull yourself together. Life isn't over. The evening is the best part of the day. Make the most of what remains of the day. Hence the name of the book. So Stevens goes off into the future, content with his situation, but with the thought that he must make the most of the remains of his day. He's in the evening of his life, his time is passing, and he has to do what he can to find joy and happiness. And that's the book in a nutshell. Now, it sounds rather simplistic, but it is written in such a way which is compelling to read. It's deeply enjoyable. It's written in an oldie-worldy style, yes. It's set in the 1930s and 1950s. But these are perhaps the heyday of England, of Britain, you know, of Britishness. Nothing is more British than this, you know, steadfast caricature of a butler, Stevens, refusing to show emotion. It's one of the few books, as I said, which I've read more than once. And every time I've read it, it elicits strong emotions in me. You get this sense of wanting to scream at Stevens and say, don't be a fool, show your emotions. A life of happiness lies ahead, if only you can open the door towards it. But he never does. So I think Kazuo Ishiguro captured that sort of sense of unrequited love and you know, attention to duty being more important than emotion. Very, very well. And it remains to this day, my favourite book of all time. I've read it a few times now. I've even listened to it on an audio book in my car as I drive along. And I learned something new about this era, the emotions contained within the book each time I read it. So I would recommend it to you. If you're looking for a book which captures emotion, which is very much historical in nature, I would say this could be a book which could bring a lot to your life. And if you enjoy cut glass, immaculate English, also somewhere to go to. So I hope you've enjoyed this book review. It's the first book review of this nature I've ever done. May not do another one, but I wanted to share with you the book which I always consider to be my favourite book. If you have enjoyed it, you can give it a thumbs up. You can click the red button and subscribe if you'd like to see more. You could even buy me a coffee if you'd like to support the channel, and you will find the link for that in the show notes below. So until the next time, develop yourself by reading as often as you can. And I will see you again very soon.